I have ridden 664 roller coasters across 10 different countries as of this video's recording. Some of these have absolutely epic reputations and end up living up to the hype. Others I find to be overrated, and some I would consider underrated. Today we'll be talking about those underrated rides. I have ridden some stupidly underrated roller coasters that should be getting much more love than they currently are. Before we begin, I will only be including a couple coasters from Europe since I've already uploaded a video on the top 15 most underrated European roller coasters. Therefore, I want to focus mostly on other locations in this video. So let's dive in. Here are 15 of the most underrated coasters I've ever been on. Number 15, B&M Wing Coasters. Instead of picking just one coaster for the first spot on this list, I'm grouping together a handful of coasters that all share the same model. For me, this includes Gatekeeper at Cedar Point, Wild Eagle at Dollywood, Thunderbird at Holiday World, Phoenix at Toverland, and Fluke Von Novgorad at Haida Park. Of these, I think Thunderbird could be exempt since that one actually does have a lot of fanfare, but ironically, it's not my favorite of the B&M Wing Coasters. My favorite is Phoenix at Toverland, but since that one and Fluke Von Novgorad in Germany are located in Europe, they're going to be more susceptible to being on this list. Even the ones in Europe out of the equation, I think Gatekeeper at Cedar Point and Wild Eagle at Dollywood are stupidly underrated. Though I think if I had to choose one wing coaster to be on this list, it would be Fluke Von Novgorad in Germany. I made a big mistake by not including it on the Europe list, so this is my redemption. These coasters are smooth, fun rides with tons of graceful inversions and occasionally some near-miss elements. I think they're criticized by enthusiasts for a lack of originality, but I get it. They've been so successful to the point where they don't really need to be creative. If you haven't already, try to get on one of these wing coasters. I think you'll really enjoy it. Number 14, Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags America. If you've ridden the identical Ride of Steel coaster at Six Flags Darien Lake in New York, feel free to lump that in here as well. I think this layout gets way too much criticism. I agree that it can be a little awkward flying through straight track and never-ending helixes, but we're still looking at a 200-foot hypercoaster with loads of airtime. That camelback that takes place after the straight track might be the absolute most underrated moment of airtime I have ever experienced. Some elite stuff right there. It's also got the classic Intamin lap bar and is a very smooth coaster. I tend to give this ride less flack than others because people overlook the good in favor of the bad. And bad might be overdoing it, since the dull parts where a bunch of forces aren't really being applied to riders isn't exactly bad. You're still going very fast. A super fun ride, pun intended. Number 13, Orion at Kings Island. It's a little ironic that I have to put a giga coaster on a list like this. Orion is one of the tallest roller coasters ever built, yet it's often compared to better giga coasters like Fury 325 at Carowinds and is criticized for being a bit short. But my brother, who will always call out a ride for being short, thought Orion's length was perfectly acceptable. Sorry, but 5,300 feet of track is not short. Since the coaster travels at speeds of up to 91 miles per hour, I wouldn't call it a long ride, but all things considered, I think the park did a great job with Orion. Like the other B&M Gigas, the sense of speed is incredible and the forces are intense. Orion is without a doubt my favorite roller coaster at Kings Island. Number 12, Canyon Blaster at Adventure Dome. This right here is a case for a fantastic ride that not many coaster enthusiasts get around to riding. And if you live in the eastern half of the country, I understand that. Canyon Blaster, El Loco, and Big Apple Coaster aren't going to be enough for you to take a devoted trip to Las Vegas, Nevada. Unfortunately, it's just not the coaster hub it arguably once was. But if you are taking a trip to Vegas, which is still a highly popular tourist destination, and you're a roller coaster fanatic, this is something you need to make a priority. Canyon Blaster is an old aerodynamics looping coaster crammed into this compact indoor amusement park. Some way, somehow, it has almost the exact same layout as Carolina Cyclone or Carowinds, but that ride is child's play compared to this thing. Canyon Blaster feels like it's running like twice as fast through the layout. My favorite part is the double vertical loops where you are hardcore graying out, but then are launched into your restraint from this airtime pop while your vision is still fuzzy. It is an absolutely crazy sequence of elements, and so is the rest of the ride with the quick double corkscrew and helix weaving in and outside of the rockwork. Number 11, Mystic at Wallaby Rhone Alps. This is pretty much on here for the exact same reason as Canyon Blaster. No one gets to ride this coaster, and I get it, no enthusiasts are going to be in the southeastern part of France for roller coasters. We only got to visit this park since we happen to be in Geneva, Switzerland, which is only about an hour and a half away. We had to devote a little bit of a detour to ride Mystic because I knew I probably wouldn't be this close to the park for a very long time. And I'm glad I made that decision because this is the most underrated Gerstlauer Infinity coaster I've ever ridden. It's one of the smaller ones at just 100 feet tall, but it is silky smooth and packed with a great variety of forces. For those of you in the States, Mystic is going to be most similar to the upcoming Palindrome at Codaland, even down to the turntable which allows the ride to go backwards. I have much higher expectations for Palindrome than I did before riding Mystic. The way they integrated a spike here was so brilliant, they slanted this element enough to where you'll be hanging upside down for quite a while. The look of it with the track ending so that there's no way to go but backwards is such an incredible idea. As of now, this park is so remote to the point where I'm not sure it's worth it for a coaster enthusiast in most circumstances, but the park will be adding a new Intamin ride for the 2024 season, so at that point you may want to consider taking a trip to Wallaby Roan Alps. Number 10, Verbolton at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Look, I know a lot of you miss the old Big Bad Wolf that operated from 1984 to 2009, but oftentimes parks will fail to come up with a good enough replacement, and Verbolton is not one of those. I have a strange obsession with this coaster because I think it is criminally underrated. Its biggest drop is just 88 feet tall, right where Big Bad Wolf's drop used to take place, and for the most part I think most of the family could definitely enjoy this coaster. But I am a little skeptical because Verbolton pulls some pretty crazy forces in that indoor bit with all the theming. There's even a surprise moment in the darkness that I won't spoil for those of you who haven't ridden this coaster, but it's really the cherry on top to the ride experience. It's decked out with theming both in the queue line and on ride, and the layout is loads of fun. I think it's a bit unfair to call this a family coaster, but if you do consider it as such, here's a bold take. This is my favorite family coaster I've ever been on. Number 9, Legend at Holiday World. This one might not be that underrated, I guess it just depends on who you ask, but if one thing's for certain, it isn't talked about nearly as much as Voyage. In a park with 3 incredible wooden roller coasters, the Voyage almost always steals the spotlight, and for good reason. Though even Raven, I would say, gets more love than this thing does. But man, Legend is outstanding. It's such a long ride to the point where it feels like it's about to end when you're just like halfway done. The laterals are some of the best on the planet, and the ride just hauls ass. It is so intense. It also ran quite smooth when I rode it this past autumn, which is a complaint I've heard a couple times in the past. Overall, this is one of the best wooden coasters I've ridden, and it currently claims a spot in my overall top 25. Number 8, King Daka at Six Flags Great Adventure. Here's another ride plagued by what I'd like to call the Orion effect. It's compared way too often to Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point, which does pretty much about everything better than King Daka. It's smoother, it's got a better launch, and it's only got lap bars. But with the massive renovations they're doing to Top Thrill Dragster, who knows if it'll be the superior ride anymore? Maybe then will people be showing more love to this thing. King Daka is the tallest roller coaster in the world and second fastest at 456 feet tall and 128 miles per hour. Those are some crazy statistics, and in my opinion, it more than lives up to the stats. It's one of the most intense, out-of-control, adrenaline-pumping experiences you can get at any park ever. There is no reason people should be giving this ride crap for shaking around a little bit or having over-the-shoulder restraints, because it is just so unreal in every other aspect. King Daka, for me, is currently a top 15 coaster, and it's just one spot away from El Toro in my rankings. Number 7, Aftershock at Silverwood. Vekoma giant inverted boomerangs are few and far between these days. For the longest time, the only ones in America were this and Goliath at Six Flags New England, which I heard was terrible. Goliath had these bulky Premier Rides trains that ran super rough on the track. I think people that rode Goliath just assume that that's how all the giant inverted boomerangs ran. But no, Aftershock is relatively smooth, it's super intense, and it's one of the most overlooked coasters in the country. It doesn't help that Silverwood is located in North Idaho, which means in order to check off this park, you'll pretty much have to make a devoted trip for it. Because there are so few coaster enthusiasts visiting the place, I think you could make an argument that all of their top 3 or 4 could be on this list. But since I want to give a bunch of different rides a shot for this video, I chose Aftershock in particular since I think that is the most underrated of all Silverwood's coasters. Number 6, Fluke Von Novgorad at Hansa Park. This theme park, located in North Germany, has been put on the map for a Gerstlauer Infinity coaster called the Schwartes It's absolutely one of the best rides I've ever been on, and I understand why it gets so much praise. But in the same park is a Gerstlauer Eurofighter with the same color scheme and similar appearance that gets a fraction of the recognition. This is Fluke Von Novgorad, by far the best Gerstlauer Eurofighter in the world. The ride is part dark ride and part coaster, so it's immersive in addition to being really crazy. Its launch at the beginning is probably the most forceful LSM launch I've ever experienced, and there's even a beyond vertical drop in pitch darkness at the end. It's a ride filled with surprises, both thematically and layout-wise, and you absolutely need to put it on your bucket list if you have not ridden it. Number 5, Abyssus at Energylandia. If you watched my European version of this list, you'll remember that I said Abyssus was the most underrated roller coaster I rode on the continent. I find that a lot of these are underrated because they are compared to better rides built by the same manufacturer. In the case of Abyssus, there happens to be an ultra-intense Vekoma Bermuda Blitz called Let Coaster not too far away at Legendia. The difference is, Let Coaster tries to kill you, and Abyssus does not. This is mostly a graceful experience, even though you do gray out at points. Oftentimes, the elements are taken with just the right amount of speed to guarantee some solid airtime and positive G-forces. It's also a perfectly smooth ride experience with a very long layout. There's no reason anyone should be even remotely disappointed with Abyssus. It's a great coaster that stands its own very well. Number 4, Monster at Adventureland. I don't think there's many people that go to Iowa for good roller coasters, but they have some cool stuff there. Namely, if you get around to Monster, it is one of the most underrated roller coasters here in the United States. It's by far my favorite first roller coaster in the country because of how unique the layout is and how smooth it is. It feels like you're riding on a cloud when you're on some of these elements. The Beyond Vertical drop is absolutely one of the best I've experienced, the curvy top hat is sweet, and the finish loop is the only inversion of its kind outside of Finland. In a lot of my videos, I'll sometimes mention how I'm not the biggest fan of hang time, but I think it's because a lot of hang time centric coasters do not have lap bars. This is not one of those. The lap bar restraint makes it so easy to appreciate the hanging sensation. Monster is an incredibly overlooked ride. Number 3, Boss at Six Flags St. Louis. One of the most polarizing roller coasters there is, Boss is one that blew my expectations out of the water. I've always been a sucker for large wooden coasters, and this is one of the best. First of all, it's an absolutely massive layout. Perched right up against a wooded hillside, it reminds me a lot of Beast at Kings Island with the forested setting. It's also stupidly intense, probably one of the top 3 most intense wood coasters I've ever ridden. You absolutely fly through the layout in the first and third halves. The middle section is the one part that definitely loses steam because of the mid-course brake drone, but everything else is exceptional. I also don't find this coaster to be all too rough. It's enough to give the ride some bite, but not uncomfortable in my opinion. I marathoned this coaster like a dozen times at night, and after that point, I definitely did start to feel it in my head, but I don't think that's something I'd even be able to say with Mindblower at Funspot Kissimmee or even Voyage at Holiday World. Those rides are almost too much to marathon sometimes. Call me crazy, but this is almost the best roller coaster in the state of Missouri. Number 2, Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It blows my mind that people have the audacity to hate on this ride. I got 3 rides in on Pantheon last spring, and oh my god, I still cannot believe what I rode. This is without question one of the greatest launch coasters of all time. It's not as good as Velocicoaster, but it isn't as far off as a lot of people make it out to be. The swing launch segment is absolutely ridiculous, and the sequence of elements thereafter is some of the best in the world. I love the Beyond Vertical drop, I love the outward banked airtime hill, and I love the stall. The main thing people like to criticize this ride for is a lack of theming. Look, I'm with you guys that Pantheon should have opened with more theming, but as I've said in past videos, you shouldn't knock a coaster for having no theming. The way I see it, theming can make a ride better, but not worse. It's like criticizing Iron Gwazi for having no theming, like I just don't get it. Pantheon is one of the greatest coaster layouts of all time, and I think more people need to start realizing that. Intamin knocked it way out of the ballpark with this one. Number 1, Gale Force at Playland's Castaway Cove. It's been since 2020 since I last rode this coaster, and I still have not shut up about how underrated it is. I can count on my fingers how many coaster enthusiasts I've heard talk about this ride. I know it's not at a major park, and it's certainly a bit of a detour from like Great Adventure or something like that, but it's worth it. Gale Force has some fun launches and all, but the ride really begins once you crest that top hat. The airtime on every one of these elements feels bizarre and incredible all at once. I think what seals the deal is the fact that the park now sends the train around twice. If it circled the layout once, it still would have made this list, but since you experience all of the elements twice, it was able to claim the number 1 spot on this list. If you live on the East Coast, drop what you're doing and plan a trip to the Jersey Shore. Pair in a visit to Playland's Castaway Cove with Maury's Piers and Casino Pier, and there you go, that's an awesome little trip. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Let me know what coasters you think are the most underrated. Are there any that I missed out on or any you disagree with? I'd love to hear about all of that in the comment section below. Also, if you could like this video and subscribe to Coaster Dash, it would mean a lot because the algorithm has not been on my side lately. Thanks again, I appreciate you all very much, and I'll see you in a future video. Bye guys.